So Dave, you ready for the next game yet?
Man, I don't know. I've played a lot of D&D lately.
Be still my heart.
Is this game going to be any different than the last one?
What do you mean?
Is the setting going to be different?
Well, what would you say if I told you that the setting is actually based on heavy metal music?
Now that's something I can get behind, Ted. Yeah! Running a non-standard D&D game. Hello and welcome to Nerdarchy. For nerds, by nerds, I'm Nerdarchy Steve, and as usual, I'm hanging out with this nerd.
Nerdarchy Ted.
Hey, do you want more D&D videos in your YouTube feed? Then jam on over to that subscribe button.
And if you're looking for more Nerdarchy videos, then you might want to explore that notification bell.
So we're going to talk about non-standard D&D games today, which honestly, that brings us right to our sponsor for this video because they've got a non-standard D&D campaign up on Kickstarter called the Red Opera. Obviously, this is compatible for 5e D&D, and it is the Red Opera Last Days of the Warlocks is an extensive player-driven campaign designed for 5th edition. All are welcome in the Shadelands, a all-new realm where events unfold for anyone in the Shadelands, be they adventurer, nobleman, or thief, can strike temporary bargain with its many patrons. That's right, there are tons of Warlock patrons in this setting. There's tons of Warlocks. Matter of fact, it's ruled by Warlocks. What happens when Warlocks rule everything and the Warlock King begins going insane? I know there's new backgrounds, new patrons, new subclasses. This has got everything, but that's not all. Each act of the Red Opera features a fully orchestrated track by Diamorte and the Budapest Scoring Symphonic Orchestra, which is awesome. It also, there is a crossover and tie-in with the Heavy Metal Hall of Fame, as well as this is actually a heavy metal opera that is being designed, put on, and then they went and turned it into a campaign for D&D. There is nothing that goes together more than heavy metal and Dungeons and Dragons, in my opinion.
So, we've got a little bit of teaser, before this, went live. I saw the video. There's a lot of awesome things that this has got to bring out to D&D. There's a lot of, love and hate on the Warlock, and I think this is a setting that's going to bring all of that, full frontal. And when you look at it, like, they have a unique system for adding, essentially Warlock powers to every single class that's out there. So you can technically get a Warlock flavor while playing any other class. So I am very interested in seeing what this has to offer. You definitely have to check out this Kickstarter. The link is going to be down in the description below.
All right, with that, let's talk about it. Ted, what makes a setting a non-standard D&D setting?
Well, I mean, that's going to be a, easy yet difficult question to answer. There are many things that fall into the non-standard. It's anything that literally is not just your typical, Tolkien-esque fantasy. You've got a world that's, full of elves, dwarves, and magic, and, you've got to deal with the evils that are out there. And that's your typical fantasy. So anything that breaks from that,
So I feel like we could just look at the examples that Wizards of the Coast has put forth over the years.
That's where I was going next. You've got Eberron, you've got Dark Sun. These are two very different, divergent paths. Dark Sun, the world that has been destroyed by magic. Magic, in itself is considered an evil act. Even those who try to, do so cautiously. Or then you've got Eberron, which is kind of beginning to get into that, almost science fantasy, adding in the artificers and, these different crafts and what have you that add vehicles and, technology into the day-to-day life.
Yeah, Ravenloft, Spelljammer, Planescape, all of those are they're actually kind of non-standard settings. Because if you wanted to compare them to a standard setting, when we're specifically talking about D&D, then I would say Greyhawk and Forgotten Realms are your very, very Tolkien-esque deviations, right? So, when we start moving away from those kind of settings, then we start getting into and exploring non standard D&D settings. So let's look at that a little bit more. What obstacles must a DM overcome when using a non-standard world?
So depending upon what you're actually looking at, what kind of world you're playing in, those things, are going to be your obstacles. Anything that's a deviation from the norm, because most of the time when players say, I'm playing D&D, they are going to expect that typical fantasy world. If, you say, oh, there are no elves in my game, and the player that's invited to the table isn't aware of that, and they happen to love elves, and every time they play some kind of elf, that's going to be an obstacle. That's a,
So your players are kind of the obstacle. I would, even more so than the player side of things, right? Because we can address that separately. That's a whole thing, right? But I want to say, when you're trying to put together a non-standard D&D setting, like a lot of the stuff that Wizards of the Coast has done for you, or even other third parties, whoever your favorite publishers are, they've done the work for you. But generally, it's for standard D&D games, right? You're going to chuck all of that. You're going to have to work from scratch to create your own. Does your world consist of and use the standard D&D races, or have you decided to get rid of them? If you are using them, do they operate the same way? I would say no, probably, because you're going non-standard, right? Maybe in your world, orcs are good. They're not evil. Halflings are the ones you got to watch out for. They're the evil little bastards that are going to murder everybody. Or they're just not there at all. Maybe you're making up brand new races that have never existed before, only in your imagination. That creates a lot of work for you as the DM, but also it creates a lot of work that you're going to put forth to the players, because now they have to get vested and learn all this new stuff. You guys don't have a shared universe anymore where everybody understands and knows how everything works.
When you do have to go through all of that work, the lore that typically everyone understands, well, this is the way how elves act, this is the way how dwarves typically act. You can grab a dwarf character and play it fresh off the character sheet. But if you don't know what this thing is, and you have to roleplay it, well, how does this work? There's going to be a lot of extra lore that you're going to have to give your players when you're playing these non-standard things, because the players aren't going to know it, and that does rely on you as the DM to have to share that, or, write all of that down and provide it to the player ahead of time, and then that player then has to, read and memorize that information to be able to use throughout the game.
I'm running a game right now I call Court of Worms. I did a Saber Dice mini-series, 6 episodes there, and Ted's a player, and several other people are players in it, and one of the things is the standard races don't exist. We're using all the reptilian races, plus humans, but humans are kind of the primitive race in this setting. They tend to be tribal. They don't have more advanced cultures like these reptilian races, and they even kind of have like a derogatory term that they use when referring to humans. They call them hairless apes. They see them as being slightly better than animals, just because they're so different than them. There are no elves, dwarves, or halflings. My players that have learned those races, they've had to learn them from books because they don't exist within this place. I'm not using gods. There's elemental magic and religions that are taking place and being used instead. So these are all changes that the players have to adapt to, and it's all lore and mechanics that I kind of had to change or come up with. The ruling class are these dragon emperors, but they're not like standard dragons out of the book. They're almost like celestial beings mixed with dragons. So there's some different things that my players are having to adapt to, and work that I had to put into the setting in order to make it work and make it non-standard.
And while the non-standard does create a lot of work, it is going to offer the players a unique experience, and hopefully a lot of people who go down these roads will find that their effort is going to be well rewarded. Dave and I have both been playing for well over 25 years. I think Dave is actually over 30 at this point in time, and we're looking at having played so many hours, so many campaigns of D&D, that the typical fantasy-esque setting just isn't what we're looking for these days. We want to do something different. We want to see and explore other avenues within the realms of D&D. And we've played Ravenloft and Dark Sun and Eberron, and when we explore and see these things, are like, oh, there's a lot of things that you can take. Whether you use bits and pieces from here, there, and somewhere else. Like I've looked at Spelljammer games and I'm like, man, that's a lot of fun. But if I were to do that, I'd really want to, read the books, learn the lingo, and make sure that I'm, speaking, those characters, using that lingo properly. But if you were to take that to, kind of create your own world, you've got to do that extra work yourself. You got to figure out, what are, accents for an area if you do voices. What kind of slang and lingo does this region use versus that region? These are fun elements that if you're really into, campaign building and world building, they're a lot of fun to work with. If it's not your thing, then, stick to the things that are out there and go learn those settings. But avoid, try to explore those other non-standard games because they're so much fun.
So, also, going back to the idea of the players, what about them? I will say one of the biggest things you have to take into consideration with your players when you do a game like this is buy-in. Do they want to play in this game, or do they want traditional D&D? If the answer is they want traditional D&D, do not play this game with them. Find players that want to play this game. And, you have to give them enough information in order to get vested in the campaign and what their characters know. Maybe you need to do a little write-up for your campaign so they have an understanding of what to expect. But at the same time, it can be fun for them because they're going to get to explore this new world that you've created, and they're going to have discoveries in the game that they haven't had for a while as a player because maybe they've been playing for a while. Or maybe you let them add to your world and you guys create it together as a kind of a co-op thing, so they get to get the joys of world building and experience that together with you as the GM.
I 100% agree with all of that. Player buy-in is the most important thing. When you're looking at, starting a new game, the rule set that you're using, the setting that you're using, the character options that you're going to play with. If you offer, too much diversity from what somebody is used to or willing to do, that is going to make that a challenge and possibly push someone away from your game. And, that can create frictions, that can create problems. So getting the player invested in the game, getting invested in that character that they want to play is super important. And, if you make them jump through hoops and hurdles, it's going to be a challenge for them. But, simple little, couple paragraph write-ups on, races, settings. You don't have to give them the whole world all at once. When Dave and I both, ran a game out of the same city, we started with, this kind of geographical location. And as the game went on, we built out as we went. Even though that was a more traditional-esque game, the same could easily be adapted to running in a non-standard way.
So if you like this kind of discussion, we have a video you might want to check out, 3 evil D&D druid ideas.
If you like adding new and interesting ideas to your game, then you might want to check out all the 5th edition D&D content for players and DMs alike over on our Patreon.
But that's not all we do. We do weekly patron-only live chats, monthly giveaways our patrons are automatically entered in, and more.
So until next time, stay nerdy.